On the night of December 10th, 2008, two brothers sat across from their father in a New York City apartment. They had just learned something that would destroy their family forever. Their father, a man they had trusted their entire lives, had been running a fraud for nearly 50 years. Not millions of dollars, not hundreds of millions, $65 billion. The largest Ponzi scheme in the history of the world, built by their own father, hidden from regulators, hidden from investors, and hidden, somehow, even from them. The two brothers made a decision that night that most children could never imagine making. They picked up the phone, and they called the Federal Bureau of Investigation on their own father. This is the story of Bernie Madoff and the family he destroyed twice, once with his lies and once with the truth. To understand how this happened, you need to understand who Bernie Madoff was before any of this became public. He started his investment firm in 1960 with $5,000 he had saved from working summer jobs as a lifeguard and a sprinkler installer. Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities, small, unremarkable at first. But Madoff was ambitious. He understood something most traders at the time didn't: speed. He became one of the early pioneers of electronic trading, helping develop technology that would eventually evolve into NASDAQ itself. By the 1980s, Madoff wasn't just a successful trader. He was a pillar of the financial industry. He served as chairman of the NASDAQ stock market multiple times. He sat on regulatory committees. He advised on policy. The man who would later orchestrate the largest fraud in financial history helped shape the very rules meant to prevent fraud. But it was his other business, his investment advisory arm, that built his true legend. Madoff offered something that seemed almost magical to wealthy investors: steady returns, year after year, never wildly high, never alarmingly low, just consistent, reliable, around 10 to 12% annually. In an industry built on volatility, Madoff offered something rarer than profit. He offered certainty. Investors didn't just want into his fund, they begged. Membership felt exclusive, like joining a private club reserved for people who had access to something nobody else could touch. Country clubs in Florida and New York became unofficial recruiting grounds. Friends told friends, family told family. Jewish charitable organizations entrusted him with their endowments. Universities, foundations, retirees. People who had spent decades building modest fortunes handed everything to Madoff because everyone they trusted told them he was different. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't aggressive. He spoke softly. He seemed almost reluctant to take on new clients, which, ironically, made people want him even more. By the early 2000s, Bernie Madoff was managing billions of dollars for some of the wealthiest individuals and institutions in America. His sons, Mark and Andrew, worked at the firm, but in a separate division, the legitimate trading business, not the investment advisory arm, where the real fraud was happening. They believed they were working for a legend. However, they had no idea they were standing inside a lie that had already consumed their entire family's name. The warnings about Bernie Madoff did not come quietly. They came loudly, repeatedly, for nearly a decade. A financial analyst named Harry Markopolos first grew suspicious in 1999. He ran the numbers on Madoff's reported returns and concluded something mathematically impossible. No legitimate trading strategy could produce the consistency Madoff claimed, not through bull markets, not through crashes, not through any market condition in financial history. Markopolos did something most people never do. He didn't just suspect, he built a case. He submitted detailed reports to the Securities and Exchange Commission in 2000, again in 2001, and again in 2005, with a report literally titled, "The World's Largest Hedge Fund is a Fraud." He laid out 29 red flags, specific, documented, and undeniable. The SEC investigated multiple times, and every single time, they cleared Madoff of wrongdoing. Why? Because Madoff was charming, because he was respected, and because he had spent decades building relationships with the very regulators meant to catch him. He answered questions with calm confidence, and he provided documents that looked legitimate on the surface. The SEC investigators never verified the actual trades with the institutions Madoff claimed he was trading through, a basic check that would have ended everything years earlier. Meanwhile, inside the firm itself, something was deeply wrong. The investment advisory business operated on a separate floor, access was restricted, and even senior employees were not allowed to ask too many questions. Frank DePascali, one of Madoff's closest lieutenants, later admitted that the entire operation was fabricated from the very beginning. Fake trade confirmations, fake account statements, numbers pulled from old market data to make returns look historically accurate. It wasn't sophisticated fraud, it was simple, almost embarrassingly simple. But it worked because nobody, with real power, wanted to look closely enough to see it. By late 2008, the global financial crisis was tearing through markets worldwide. Investors everywhere needed cash. They started requesting withdrawals from Madoff's fund at a pace he had never experienced before. There was a problem. There was no real money. The fund had never actually invested the billions it claimed to manage. It was a Ponzi scheme in its purest form. Early investors were paid using money from new investors. As long as new money kept flowing and faster than withdrawals went out, the illusion held. But in December 2008, investors wanted $7 billion back. Madoff had nowhere near that amount. On December 9th, he told his brother, Peter, that the business was finished. The next day, December 10th, he asked his sons, Mark and Andrew, to come to his apartment. According to their later accounts, he told them he was planning to pay out several $1 million in bonuses earlier than scheduled, months ahead of when bonuses were normally paid. It struck them as strange. The business was supposedly in trouble. Why pay bonuses early? They pressed him, and that is when Bernie Madoff told his own sons the truth. The business was a fraud. It had always been a fraud. There was no money. It was, in his own words, one big lie. His sons were stunned. Andrew later said he felt like he couldn't breathe. Mark left the apartment and walked the streets of Manhattan for hours, trying to process what he had just learned. They consulted a lawyer that same night. The lawyer's advice was immediate and unambiguous. Report it, now. The next morning, December 11th, 2008, Mark and Andrew Madoff contacted federal authorities. Their own father was arrested that same day. The man who had spent 50 years building an empire of trust had been turned in by the only people who had no reason to ever doubt him: his own children. Here's what most people never learn about this case. Turning in their father did not save the family, it destroyed it. Friends disappeared overnight. Their last name became a curse. And within 2 years, one of his sons would be dead, not from old age, not from illness. This is the part of the story that most documentaries skip entirely. Stay with me, because what happened to Bernie Madoff's family might be the most tragic part of this entire story. Bernie Madoff pleaded guilty in March 2009 to 11 federal felony charges. He admitted the entire investment business had been a fraud for decades. He was sentenced to 150 years in federal prison, the maximum possible sentence. The judge stated the crime was so severe it deserved a symbolic message. For the victims, the financial damage was almost incomprehensible. Thousands of investors, retirees who lost their entire life savings, charities that shut down because their endowments had vanished overnight. One Holocaust survivor lost everything he had spent his entire life rebuilding. The court-appointed trustee spent over a decade tracking down and recovering assets to repay victims, eventually recovering more than $14 billion, a remarkable percentage of the original losses, though many victims never recovered what they had lost emotionally. For Mark and Andrew Madoff, the consequences were devastating in ways money could never measure. Despite reporting their father immediately, despite cooperating fully with federal investigators, the public largely refused to believe they hadn't known. Lawsuits were filed against them, friends abandoned them, and their children were ostracized. On December 11th, 2010, exactly 2 years to the day after he turned in his father, Mark Madoff took his own life in his New York apartment. He left no note addressed to his father. Andrew Madoff spent his remaining years trying to clear his and his brother's name, speaking publicly about the trauma of discovering the truth. He died of cancer in 2014. Bernie Madoff died in federal prison in April 2021, still serving his sentence. He had outlived both of his sons. The man who built an empire on trust had destroyed every relationship that trust was supposed to protect. Before we finish, drop one word in the comments. If you were in Mark and Andrew's position, would you have made the same call? Report your own father, knowing what it would cost you. One word, yes or no. I read every single one. And if this is the first Shadow Betrayals video you've ever watched, We've covered cases just as devastating. CEOs who vanished and fortunes that disappeared overnight. Go check them out after this one, because the pattern never stops repeating. Bernie Madoff's story teaches us that nobody wants to say out loud. The most devastating betrayals don't just destroy the people who lose money, they destroy the people closest to the liar. Bernie Madoff's sons worked beside him for years. They built careers, believing in his legacy. And in one single night, that legacy became their burden, not because they had done anything wrong, but because trust is never just a transaction. It's inherited, it's assumed, it's given to people simply because of who they're connected to. When that trust turns out to be a lie, the damage doesn't stop with the liar. It spreads to everyone who shared his name, his sons, his wife, his grandchildren. People who never stole a single dollar still paid the price for decades. That is the part of corporate betrayal that headlines rarely capture. The fraud is never just financial, it's generational. If this story made you think, subscribe, because the next case we're covering involves a company that promised to change the world, and instead it became one of the most expensive lies in startup history.